Euaoi.
The public domain is a beautiful tool for content creators to use to make something new out of things that are once old. But for the longest time, a certain company, Disney, has been lobbying Congress for years to extend copyright protection laws. Not to mention that they're also extremely protective of some of their characters that they didn't originally create. Such as when Winnie the Pooh entered the public domain back in 2022. Disney had to mention that they still own their version of the character and that anyone who dares to put a red shirt on him shall face the wrath of the mouse. And it's also ironic with how uptight Disney is regarding copyright laws, given that some of their most iconic animated movies were based on stories that entered the public domain. We finally saw Disney's precious mascot, the one that they fought hard to keep within the realms of copyright for so long, Mickey Mouse, and his original short, Steamboat Willie. They finally entered the public domain this year. Or last year, depending on when you watch this. 2025 is also when you should expect more of the mouse to become public domain, as 12 more Mickey Mouse cartoons will join Steamboat Willie in the realms of the public domain. And what's even more important is that 1929 is the first year where Mickey Mouse wore his signature white gloves, which means you can draw Mickey with gloves and not face scrutiny from Disney, as long as he's still in black and white. On top of that, Disney's cartoon, The Skeleton Dance, will also be in the public domain that year. Other material entering the public domain that year include musical compositions like Arthur Freed's Singing in the Rain and Alfred Dublin's Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Though the 1968 recording by Tiny Tim is still copyrighted. Novels like Ernest Hemingway's A Farewell to Arms and John Steinbeck's first novel, Cup of Gold. And even characters like Tintin and Popeye the Sailor Man. It almost makes you wonder, what new and exciting things will people make with all of these new properties now that their copyright has finally expired?
Years ago, there was a spinach contamination.
I am what I am.
Really? A slasher film? Ever since fictional characters like Winnie the Pooh and Mickey Mouse entered the public domain, having slasher films starring them has pretty much become a trend among independent filmmakers. They do this solely for shock value by saying, hey, we took this child-friendly character and turned them into a bloodthirsty killer. Aren't we so edgy? Those filmmakers really don't care if the movie's good. The only thing that matters to them is that they were the first to make a slasher film based on those characters. It's basically YouTube drama slop, but for independent filmmakers. First, there was Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, where the movie received atrocious reviews and even won awards for Worst Movie. But the reviews didn't matter since the movie made $7.7 million at the box office, which isn't really bad given the movie had a budget of only $100,000. Additionally, the movie got a sequel in 2024, which featured Tigger, who also entered the public domain in that year, and made roughly the same amount as the first movie, just with a budget of $500,000. What's different is that the reviews for this movie were significantly better than the first. It should also be mentioned that a third movie was announced just 2 days after the sequel's release. When Mickey Mouse entered the public domain, we got The Mousetrap, where the movie was originally going to be released worldwide in March of that year, but suffered numerous delays to the point where the movie ended up getting released in the US via video on demand in August of that same year. And as expected, the reviews for the movie were mostly negative. There's also going to be another Mickey Mouse slasher film coming in January titled Screamboat. Haha, get it? It's like a steamboat, but scary. Aren't we so clever? I should also mention that Brian Quinn from Impractical Jokers is having a cameo appearance in that movie. There's also another titled The Return of Steamboat Willie, which is animated using Unreal Engine 5. There's even going to be a crossover horror film titled Mickey vs. Winnie, even though it's not related to the Mousetrap nor Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. For Mickey, it didn't stop at horror films. There were also horror games being made of Steamboat Willie. As game developer, Nightmare Forge Games made a game called Infestation Origins. While the game is not done yet, an early access for this game was released in November 2024. Another Steamboat Willie themed horror game set to release in 2025 is titled Bad Cheese. And unlike Infestation Origins, this one has a more cartoony atmosphere akin to the classic cartoon. And now, Popeye is joining the club of public domain cartoon characters that also have slasher films, with his film being titled Popeye the Slayer Man. Wow, real creative title right there. While it's disappointing that most people are just using the public domain to make low-quality slasher films and horror games, and what's worse is, it's probably not gonna stop there, since Mickey's canine companion Pluto is entering the public domain in 2026. Which means if the Mousetrap ever gets a sequel, there's a good chance Pluto's going to be in it. Other characters expected to enter the public domain soon include, but are not limited to, Universal's Dracula and Frankenstein in 2027, King Kong in 2029, Mickey's pals Goofy in 2028, and Donald Duck in 2030. Just in time for the Mousetraps 3 and 4. As for the Looney Tunes cast, Porky Pig will enter the public domain in 2031, Daffy Duck in 2033, and Bugs Bunny in 2034. Just to give those independent filmmakers a time frame for making Looney Tunes slasher films. Even superheroes like Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman will become public domain in 2034, 2035, and 2037 respectively. Hopefully, them being in the public domain will inspire independent film studios to make their own version of Batman vs. Superman instead of more slasher films. Since I want to end this video on a high note, I would like to mention that not everything starring newly public domain characters ended up being slasher films and horror games. The music video for the song One-Eyed Bastard by Green Day featured Mickey Mouse in his Steamboat Willie outfit with an eye patch. Webcomic artist R.K. Milholland made a webcomic series called Mousetrapped, which centers on continuing Mickey's story after the events of Steamboat Willie. There was an indie game that released called Rubber Hose Rampage, and it's basically Cuphead, just with Mickey and Minnie slapped on it. On the topic of indie games, there's a first-person boomer shooter coming out titled Mouse P.I. for Hire. Someone even made a homebrew game for the ZX Spectrum called Jet Set Steamboat Willie, which is based on Jet Set Willie. There's also another indie game coming out titled The Public Domain, The Game. And it features Mickey trying to adjust to his new life in the public domain, and it even uses recycled frames from old Mickey Mouse shorts. There's also a side-scrolling platformer made by El Gato del Tejado that's based on Steamboat Willie, where the player controls Mickey and can even use weapons based on the animals Mickey used as instruments in the classic cartoon, such as using the duck as a gun, and the cat that he swings around using its tail to attack enemies. Pete even appears as a boss where he spits tobacco at you, much like that scene in Steamboat Willie. However, the trailer was dropped last February and there has been no update on the game since then. So while there have been a lot of low-effort slasher films based on newly public domain characters, there have also been a lot of projects that are more unique and have more effort put into them. And it would be cool if there were independent content creators that did something new with Popeye that isn't just horror-related material. Like a fighting game, a chronological webcomic, hell, Miyamoto can finally make that Popeye game he originally wanted before it became Donkey Kong. What I'm trying to say is, the public domain is what we want it to be. If you're tired of all the low-effort slasher films being made with public domain characters, you can be the change that you want to see, and make something that's more unique with them. You could even be a source of inspiration for other independent content creators. Who knows? There's no copyright laws stopping us now. Anyways, that's all I have for today, and I'll see you next time.